I'm Brian Scordato, and this is the Idea to Startup podcast brought to you by Tacklebox. We accelerate ideas into real companies through the Tacklebox membership, and we think through startup strategy every Wednesday on the Idea to Startup podcast. You're here because you're thinking about an idea, or you're ready to launch something, or you already launched something and you're running full steam ahead. We're here to help with the counterintuitive stuff. On to it. Part 2. Today, we are jumping into part 2 of us starting a startup live on the pod. We uncover a secret about parents may be good enough to support a business, we build an AI Wedge product to test it, and we go into detail on all the hard things people tend to screw up when going from idea to the first thing you put in your customers' hands. In the words of one of the strangest characters from that old Frosty the Snowman Christmas cartoon that, if I'm lucky, 10% of you have watched, we've been busy, busy, busy. The hope, as always, is that hearing me do all this will make it more approachable for you. Now, if you missed part 1, you probably don't have to go back and listen to it. I'd love it if you did, but I'll give you a firm base now if you were too busy watching Hot Frosty and drinking eggnog the past 2 weeks to tune in. And if you haven't watched Hot Frosty, don't. It's not bad enough to be good or good enough to be good, if that makes sense. Anyway, on to the recap. Previously on Idea to Startup. Last episode, we kicked off a series starting an idea live on the pod. The idea was AI for parenting, and we chose it because lots of people are applying to Tacklebox with a similar type of idea. AI for insert your customer here. Over the years, we've gone through waves of blank for blank ideas. We had the Airbnb and Uber fors, Airbnb for lawn equipment or Uber for chefs. Then it was Warby Parker for office furniture or toothbrushes. Then subscription boxes for cooking spices or men's face cream. Then people tried to gamify everything, from laundry to kids' chores to grocery shopping to maybe the boldest Tacklebox app of all time, a startup that gamified sex called Game of Moans. Yikes. The literal idea was to have a feed like Fitbit where instead of tracking steps against your friends, you'd have a couples account where you'd track. You get it. Anyway, I generally hate these types of ideas because people misunderstand the hard part. They think it's thinking up the thing that comes before the 4X. When pitching their idea, they dramatically say something like, get ready for it, Airbnb for lawn equipment, then confidently lean back in their chair like they were Billy Mays. The hard part of Airbnb for lawn equipment isn't thinking up Airbnb for lawn equipment. It's building the marketplace, creating trust with first customers, finding the early use cases where each side feels disproportionate pain at the exact same time, facilitating an interaction where one side happily overpays for a lawnmower because they can get it right now, figuring out how to amplify that transaction so that it creates 3 more without you needing to spend a dime on marketing. The lawnmower and Airbnb part of it are basically irrelevant. You can build a successful business in one of 2 ways. You can be the best entrepreneur in the world and pick just about any idea and simply out-execute everyone else. Or you can be a normal person who picks an idea where you've got asymmetric information. The magic trick you pull is either you actually needing to read someone's mind to guess which card they drew from the deck, or you just strategically placing a mirror behind them. I choose the mirror every day. Asymmetric information. Which brings us back to last week's episode and why I'm, maybe surprisingly, excited that everyone is pitching me big, broad ideas like AI for carpenters, even though we've already established startups require asymmetric information, and that sentence shows that you probably have none. The reason is that the AI part of the pitch is helpful in a way the Airbnb or Warby Parker part of the pitch never was. AI can remove barriers for testing and getting feedback and can speed up the critical find asymmetric information stage. It can replace stuff that used to be time and resource intensive, like getting something potentially useful in front of customers. The magic is always going to come from the interactions, the uncomfortable, unoutsourceable conversations and ethnographic research with potential customers. But getting those interactions and building concierge MVPs that can cull the type of feedback that leads to asymmetric information is possible today in a way it simply wasn't 18 months ago. The phrase AI for carpenters isn't the end then, it's the start, And new tools can help you go from AI for carpenters as a broad idea to a tool that evaluates project parameters and provides accurate cost and time estimates for one person businesses fast. And a non carpenter, non technical person can find their way there. I know because that's a real example from a company in Tacklebox. Pursuing and testing an idea is way more accessible than it used to be. So feel free to use AI for X as a permission structure to get started on something you're interested in. We will teach you how to niche it down, which is what we do in this series and why it exists and why we started with the big, broad AI for parenting. During that first episode, we started broad. I ran a bunch of interviews with friends and friends of friends who are parents to problem hunt, to find the specific hurdles these parents encountered that they'd spent time and money and sleepless nights on trying to navigate. From these initial conversations, 4 pretty juicy problems jumped out. Problems that were urgent, expensive, painful, growing, and frequent. Here they are. First was logistics, how to get kids to the right places at the right times. Second was development uncertainty, or is it normal for my kid to be doing X right now or not be doing X right now? Third, sleep training. Basically, get my damn kid to sleep. And fourth, care coordination. How to keep everyone on the same page when a bunch of people are handing off taking care of your kid throughout the week. We landed on the last one, care coordination, as the first problem we go after. In households where both parents worked and had a kid or kids under 5, this was a massive problem. There was often a mishmash of care. Maybe a grandparent taking the kid Monday and Tuesday, a different grandparent on Wednesday, a nanny on Thursday, and the parents cobbling together Friday, or some other patchwork solution. Keeping everyone in the loop on food and sleep and development and appointments and everything else was really hard, and as we'll see, really stressful. There were a number of reasons to start with care coordination, but as good as any was speed. It felt actionable, and it seemed like interviewees were already actively trying to solve it, and entrepreneurs have to make lots of decisions with incomplete information, and speed to that decision is critical. So we'll sprint at care coordination for a bit, then pick our heads up and see if it makes any sense to keep going. Once we decided on a problem, we ran a second round of interviews, zooming in on care coordination, which we're going to recap now. After that, we'll do a little smooth jazz, then we'll finish with the concierge MVP we built in a weekend off of those deeper interviews. Let's get to them. Interviews round 2. Earned wisdom and secrets. My old boss was enamored with what he called earned wisdom. When founders would come in and pitch a product that, say, partially relied on content marketing for a rollout strategy, and they didn't have any content marketing experience, he would give them homework to, quote, earn a bit of wisdom. Go get a few lumps, earn a perspective on content marketing, then come back to me, he'd say. He'd then jump on their side of the table and help them figure out how to earn that wisdom. Maybe it was a set of campaigns they could run or a freelancer they could hire. The goal was to get your hands dirty through a quick, targeted project. He used to tell founders that the thing they were avoiding, the thing that was intimidating or uncomfortable or unknown, would become manageable if you just had a little earned wisdom. He loved founders that had done unusual things to earn wisdom. One founder had gotten a job at an urgent care clinic for a year to understand the inner workings before starting her business. My boss invested basically immediately. Round 2 of interviews for the AI for Parents idea was all about earning a bit of wisdom. The first round of interviews had been lighter. We talked about lots of problems around parenting, but the second one was going to be far more targeted. I wanted to get hyper specific around how these parents coordinated care and, more importantly, how they felt during it. So I emailed 10 people who'd mentioned care coordination as a problem, asking if they'd be willing to go deeper, and I only got 4 responses. I considered sending another round of cold emails to try and get more interviews, but decided on running these 4 first just to see if there was anything sticky I could turn into a test. Parents are busy, a good data point for when I think about customer acquisition later. To kick off each interview, I set a distinctly different tone from our first interview. I'm no longer looking to avoid anchoring you, I began. My goal today is to really go deep on one problem, to hear about how you manage it, what you've tried, who you've spoken with about it, and how you feel during each stage of it. Almost immediately, each person I spoke with went deep on what an interviewee called information lag. Quote, let's say the kid was working on putting on his shoes and socks at daycare, one said. Our grandparent who comes Monday might know this and might work with him on it, but whoever is covering Tuesday might not. So sometimes people make him take off his shoes, and sometimes people take his shoes off for him, and now he's confused, and when he's confused, he gets frustrated and cries. This might sound insignificant, but he's learning like 30 things a day. Kids develop fast. So what's expected of him changes constantly, and he's always frustrated. If you come once a week, you can't keep up. I heard a flavor of this story from all four I spoke with. I asked each if I could do a little ethnographic research, if I could watch the kid handoff. Not surprisingly, everyone said no and seemed semi-creeped out, which, when I stand back and look at it, I get. But two agreed to call me or text me the next time they felt stressed about the care situation. This text prompt is one of my favorite strategies with people you interview who seem like great potential customers. It starts to move towards them being a design partner for a product. Eventually, we want our product to feel magical, meaning when our customer reaches the hard part of their process, we jump in and handle it. We take it off their plate. For now, them calling or texting us during the hard part will give us deep insight into how we might build for that moment. This strategy has anchored a bunch of the best businesses that have come through Tacklebox. Get your customer to text you when they feel pain. One interviewee suggested something I should have thought of. Hey, they said at the end of an interview, do you want to speak with my aunt? She takes my daughter on Wednesdays, and I am sure she's got some thoughts on this. So I did. And the story from the aunt's perspective was fascinating. She'd get to the house and try to avoid asking too many questions because she didn't want to seem incompetent with the kid. But, she said, this meant she was never totally up to date. She was always guessing. Did he still nap at the same time? Was he using a fork yet? After the 4 parent calls and the 1 aunt call, I tried to synthesize what I'd learned. My first thought, and probably yours too, was the obvious communication issue. There didn't seem to be a running log or diary of what exactly the kid was up to. But this, like most thoughts that pop into your head first, were fool's gold. Every family I spoke with had some kind of notebook or text chain or something that gave the day's directions or was supposed to. The parents could easily write what the kid was focused on, or the caretaker could ask, but they weren't, so there was probably something deeper. What? It became clear through 2 separate quotes, one from the aunt and one from a parent. Here is the aunt's. So I take care of the kid 1 day a week, and my mom, his grandma, takes care of him once a week too. And we always talk about this. What are we supposed to be? Am I the fun aunt? I'd love to be the fun aunt, but I'm also the main parent like 15% of the time. My mom, the grandma, says the same thing. Is she a grandma? Is she supposed to be a mom? Is she a parental figure? Is she fun? And neither of us like being treated like an employee. That's the worst. We're family. I think the big problem we struggle with is, what is our role? What are we? Am I the aunt, the mom, an employee? What? And now the quote from a parent I spoke with about getting help from a grandparent. I feel like there's this pushback from all the grandparents involved. It feels like we aren't on the same team. They're telling me how they raised kids and they don't need help or advice or input, and I'm trying to tell them how I want my kid raised while still acknowledging that I appreciate their help and know they have a ton of experience, and I'm not trying to diminish that. And while I'd love to write out a bunch of rules, I just can't do it. I hate doing it. I don't want to tell my parents how to parent. It's just a mess. It's really hard. But we can't afford a full-time nanny, and neither of us can quit our jobs. Woo boy, there are some emotions here, which is a good thing. The best startups are the messiest ones. The real problem, I think, isn't just about communication, it's the identity crisis thing. Family caregivers feel stuck between 2 roles. They can't fully embrace being the fun aunt or favorite grandparent while enforcing the rules, but they also don't want to be treated like employees because they're family. This role tension is creating stress that no calendar or group chat is going to fix, at least one that isn't built with this tension in mind. This is a hard problem. It might not be solvable, but hard problems you aren't sure you can solve are the only things worth spending time on. And that leads to a simple question about the problems you choose to solve. What are the stakes? What happens if this problem doesn't get solved? There's a quote by Richard Hamming that I love, and if you haven't listened to or read his talk, You and Your Research, I'll pop it in the show notes. It's outstanding. The quote goes, "If you do not work on important problems, how can you expect to do important work?" In each of my interviews, I came away thinking about how important this problem was to solve, for the kid's development, but also for the parent's mental health. It's hard enough balancing raising a kid with a demanding job, but adding in the dynamics with family members amplifies the whole thing. A number of people I'd interviewed had already talked about or gone to therapy to try and deal with it all. The stakes are high. This thing is worth solving or at least chipping away at. So, let's get a little more earned knowledge. Let's try to run a test. What's that look like, though? What's a wedge product? What should we do? Tricky, tricky. We'll take a stab after a little smooth jazz. Hey, if you're struggling at the customer interview stage, you know you should do them, you appreciate the value, you just need some help, I'm running a customer interview live on Zoom 3-day workshop. I'll help you schedule your first 50 interviews, build the right questions to ask, and set up an internal system to make sure you're continually running these things. Head to gettacklebox.com/workshops and click on Get the Details to sign up. We'll send you dates and info once you do. Back to it. The Wedge. We've talked about wedge products before, and they're probably what listeners reach out to me about the most. If you aren't familiar, a wedge product tackles a small, manageable piece of a bigger problem for your first customer. It's got a short feedback loop with clear success metrics. The goal is to earn some wisdom, to help a customer through the first step of a deeper problem. Wedge products often end up as your main top-of-funnel acquisition tool. If you want more on wedges, I'll link to a few pods we've done on them in the show notes. A key component of a good wedge product is clarity around exactly what success looks like, how it's measured, and how it feels. So, a great place to start is with your hypothesis of success for your customer. My current hypothesis is that success for the patchwork childcare coverage problem will end up with everyone feeling like they're on the same side of the table helping out the kid. Information is consistent and delivered in a way that makes everyone feel valuable, with clarity around roles and expectations, and the heavy lift of a parent having to constantly have heavy conversation with loved ones off their shoulders. That same old boss I talked about before used to say that most people products succeeded by doing one of two things really well: getting people to the same side of the table or making them compete directly against each other. Trying to do both or being unclear about which you are sinks the ship. To get everyone to the same side of the table, we've got to handle the tension. Wedges work really well when they focus on a specific, highly charged moment in your customer's process. The moment I'm choosing is the handoff, when a caretaker takes over for a parent and when the parent returns. The reason I chose this moment is it's when parents texted me saying they felt the pain. They'd hand off their kid, get in the car to go to work, and text, "I didn't tell them about X, Y, and Z because I didn't want to overwhelm or overstep, but now I wish I had and now I'm stressed." Or, "I was mean to them and snippy for no reason." Snippy was a direct quote and I've adopted it. Might be the word of 2025 for me. Anyway, I needed to zoom in on that moment and help with communication and clarity of roles. AI could, theoretically, be really helpful. As we mentioned in the first episode, AI needs to be a response to the specific problem your customer has. So, during the lulls as I waited for people to get back to me about interviews, I explored similar-ish use cases that have been solved recently with AI. A new-ish company that gained traction in the dementia care world seemed like an interesting fit. The product dealt with a problem that had a similar dynamic: dementia patients who had a number of caretakers that were reporting back to loved ones and to doctors. At the end of each shift, the product prompted a caretaker for a person with dementia with a number of questions. There were general questions around how the day went, and then specific questions about the exact amount of food eaten and when, sleep times, and behaviors. And finally, there were some open-ended prompts where the caretaker was invited to just talk through the full day. The responses were captured by a tool that acted like a voice note. The app then summarized the report for a few stakeholders. First, it create a pertinent update for loved ones. Next, it update the food, sleep, and behavior log that it kept internally. And finally, it create a document doctors could view to see the effect of, say, a change in medication or schedule. I figured this was interesting and we could maybe do something similar. I could text parents and caretakers a set of questions they would answer long form in a voice note that they sent back to me. I could then transcribe and summarize this via an AI tool like Claude, then create progress reports or goals or whatever else the parents needed. This would reduce the friction for gathering critical information. The other part of the problem is sharing that information. The AI tool for dementia patients changed the tenor and information based on their audience. It talked to doctors like doctors and loved ones like loved ones. So we could try having the messages to grandparents or caretakers feel different from the messages to parents. This might sound a bit out there, and maybe it is, but communication style is critical. In nearly all of my interviews, communication was the blocker. Parents told me the worst part of their day was often trying to tell the caretakers what they needed them to do. Removing the communication onus from the parent might be really helpful. And this brings us back to problems and pain. People only solve problems after pain, and people only actively solve one of two types of problems, what I call whole problems or teleporter problems. Whole problems are exactly what you think. Somebody falls into a hole and they need help getting out of it. The world doesn't spin until they get out of it. It's priority 1, 2, and 3. The care communication problem is not a whole problem. The second type of problem worth solving is the teleporter problem. There is a process your customer does every day. That process has a bunch of steps. You find the hardest steps and remove them. Then you teleport your customer from step 3 to step 7. You handle steps 4 to 6 for them. The more painful those steps, the more frequent those steps, the more they'll pay you for you to take it off their plate. So, my hypothesis is that the hardest steps we can remove are the communication steps. I sent an email to a few of the parents I'd spoken with asking if they'd like to partner up to try and solve this communication problem. I said that when they reached that tricky point, the handoff, I would take over. Some people were excited, some people didn't respond, and 2 committed to giving it a try. And now, a quick note on the stakes. This is a big, hairy, important problem, and I am not totally sure I'm going to be able to solve it with whatever I pull together for this Wedge product. And I definitely feel hesitant to get involved in these potentially messy situations. So, how do I move forward not being confident that I can create a great solution for these customers right off the bat? Scope, depth, and clarity. I will, at most, be working with 2 families to start, keeping the scope extremely small. Each will be what's called a design partner. I'll make it clear I have deep understanding about the problem they've got and what success is going to look like, but also that the solution I'm using is new. And no matter what the initial, quote, product looks like, this is going to be extremely manual. I'll be keyed in on every step of the process so that no communication would be sent to, say, a grandma without the parent first seeing it and signing off. Your first product is going to feel like this. It's going to be a bit scary, but it is not going to be out of your control. In the next episode of the series, we'll talk through the details of the Wedge product we'll test. I'll go into the big questions. Do we charge for it? How do we build it? Did it work? And we'll probably even give it a punny name. These episodes are always tough to wrap up because it's really just a holdover till the next episode. But if you're in the early stages of your own idea, here is what you should probably take away. First, start with customer interviews to find a problem with serious stakes, one that's worth your time. Second, zoom in on that problem and devote a few weeks or a month or a couple of months to it to start, even if you aren't 100% sure it's the right problem. You got to sprint towards something, then pick your head up and see if you went the right direction. Number 3, find the specific moment you want to live in, the one your customer texts you about because they felt the pain. That is the focus of your Wedge product. Number 4, search for products out there solving similar-ish problems in different markets for inspiration. And number 5, feel like this whole thing is a bit out of reach, like it should be solved, but maybe you aren't qualified or ready or capable of solving it. That is the sweet spot. And then maybe relax for a night and watch Hot Frosty. I know I said it was bad, but I keep thinking about it. Maybe it's just the title. Maybe it's bad enough to be good. Maybe it's just good. I don't know. Maybe we'll figure it out along with the Wedge product in the next episode. And also, if you got this far and feel like you've got the problem we're solving, reach out. I'd love to have some more beta testers. team@gettacklebox.com. Have a great week. This was the Idea to Start a Podcast brought to you by Tacklebox. Start your startup in 2025 and do it with people who can show you the way. gettacklebox.com.